are your first year expectations for Hugh Freeze? So earlier today, I asked you guys, how many games do you think Hugh Freeze is going to win year one at Auburn? And 47% of you guys said 8 to 9, and 33% of you guys said 6 to 7. Now, I was really surprised that the majority of you all had Auburn winning 8 to 9 games. And at first, before I started digging in and doing my research, I was thinking that Auburn was going to be lucky enough to make it to a bowl game. But digging into what Hugh Freeze has done this offseason for Auburn, he has really overhauled this roster. Now, he hasn't gone to the lengths that Deion Sanders has, but this team is way better going into 2023 than it was going into 2022. Last year, their offensive line wasn't good. They didn't really have good receivers. The quarterback play wasn't good, and the defense was abysmal. Well, Hugh Freeze brought in, according to 247 Sports, the third best transfer portal class. And he got some real good players out of the transfer portal. You got Peyton Thorne, former quarterback for Michigan State. Yeah, I know that he may not excite anybody, but he's good enough to get the job done. You're going to have somebody that's going to come in with veteran experience. You're going to have a QB that's played in big games, and a quarterback that's been pretty productive during his time playing in the second best conference in college football in the Big Ten. So if he ends up starting over Robbie Ashford, I think that your quarterback position is going to be pretty good. And even if you start Robbie Ashford, I think that you can't go wrong with either one, because Hugh Freeze is really good at getting the most out of quarterbacks that are in his system. He got Malik Willis to the NFL. And when you look at some other key players that they got in the transfer portal outside of quarterback Peyton Thorne, some of my favorites are cornerback or wide receiver, Shane Hooks out of Jackson State. He had 10 touchdowns last year for Deion Sanders. I think that he's going to be one of the more impactful transfers, not just for Auburn, but out of all of the other schools in the SEC. You got a really athletically gifted tight end in Rivaldo Fairweather out of FIU. This guy is a behemoth of a tight end. He is a phenomenal athlete. He reminds me a lot of Vernon Davis. For all of my college football fans out there who keep up with the NFL, Vernon Davis was a really athletic tight end for the San Francisco 49ers. He reminds me a lot of like him. And then when you look at what they brought in on the offensive line, Avery Jones, Gunnar Britton, those were two of the better offensive linemen coming out of the transfer portal. So this offensive line is going to be way better this year than what it was last year, at least when you look at this offensive line on paper. Now, the thing when you bring in offensive linemen from the transfer portal is that you wonder how long it's going to take for it to all gel and mesh together. Because here's the thing, even though you can bring in talented offensive linemen via the portal, the offensive line just isn't something that you can just plug and play and it's just instantly fixed. It also takes some time to get the communication and to get the chemistry down. So I wonder how long it's going to take for Auburn's offensive line to gel with all of the guys that they brought in via the transfer portal. Now, they do have a really good offensive line from a talent standpoint, even though there's a couple of positions that I'm kind of scratching my head about, but I think for the most part, this should be a pretty solid offensive line. And when you look at some of their key returning players, you have your leading wide receiver from last year and Javarius Johnson, who comes back. You got running back Jarquez Hunter, who I think is going to end up being one of the better running backs in the SEC this year. This is going to be a really good offense. Now, your defense, I don't think your defense can be any worse than what it was last year. I know a lot of people say, JT, don't say that because things can always be a lot worse. Like, did you not see Auburn's defense last year? I mean, they could not stop a nosebleed when it came to the run game. So what did they do to beef up that run game? Well, they got a lot of good big boys up front. And I think the talent that they have in the secondary is going to be really key. I think that they have one of the better secondaries in the SEC. And then you have a lot of guys who are experienced, a lot of guys who have a lot of starts underneath their belt. So I think Auburn overall has a really good team. And initially, I had them winning 6 games, but I think there's a really high chance that they could win 8 games this year. You look at their schedule, they have 4 guaranteed wins. They start the season off playing against UMass, Then you got to go on the road to play Cal. Then you play Stanford. So you should be 3-0 before you enter your first game of conference play, going on the road to play Texas A&M. Now, I don't know if Auburn is going to be able to beat Texas A&M this year. I'm a lot higher on Texas A&M than most people. I think they're going to end up winning 10 games, but they definitely could win that game. They have to play on the road. Hugh Freeze is really good at getting his teams prepared for big games. Then you got to play Georgia at home. Georgia is just a way different animal this year. Even though I think that Auburn probably could keep it close for the first couple of quarters, I think that Georgia probably wins. Then you got a bye week, and then you got to go on the road to Death Valley, and this is where you get into the meat and potatoes of your conference schedule. Winning at LSU is really hard to do, but I do think that there's a good chance that Auburn could pull off the upset. As a matter of fact, out of all the games I think Auburn has a chance at winning that they probably won't be favored in, I think LSU is probably going to be their best chance at pulling off an upset. I don't think LSU is going to be as good as what a lot of people think they will be. I think they had a really good year one under Brian Kelly where they shocked all of us, but I still think there's a good amount of work to be done. And then you got to play Ole Miss. Ole Miss, that game could go either way. That could be a toss-up. You got Mississippi State. Then you got to go on the road and play Vandy. Then you got to play Arkansas. Then you got New Mexico State before you gear up for the Iron Bowl, which you host at home against Alabama. So my floor for Auburn this year is 6 wins. And my ceiling for Auburn, if everything goes right and this offensive line can gel early right out the gate, I have them winning 9 games. That's my ceiling. So my best case scenario is 9 wins. My worst case scenario is 6 wins. If I had to give you an overall record prediction, I say that they probably can win 7 to 8 games this year. I'll probably lean more towards 7 than I will 8, but that's my prediction for Auburn. I think that Hugh Freeze is going to have a really successful first year as the head coach of Auburn. Brian Harsons, the thing just never really worked out. People in the program seemed like they weren't really big fans of him. He made some really bad staff hires. I think when you look at what Hugh Freeze has brought in via the transfer portal, the fact that he's really good at scheming things up on the offense side of football, that's going to be a plus for Auburn's offense. I think that Hugh Freeze is going to have a pretty successful season for Auburn. Their over-under win total right now is 6.5, so technically, with me expecting them to win either 7 or 8 games, that would be them exceeding expectations. And I think that Hugh Freeze was a fantastic hire for Auburn. I think that he's going to have recruiting booming. He already has hit the transfer portal pretty hard. And I don't think that this is going to be a long-term rebuild. We saw the success that Brian Kelly had last year, utilizing the transfer portal. Same thing with Lincoln Riley and USC. And Auburn already had some talented players on this roster before Hugh Freeze got there. So I think that Auburn is going to be a pretty solid team year one under Hugh Freeze.